I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. I'm delighted to be joined on the virtual sofa today by Anne Shiels. I'll let Anne introduce herself, but I was keen to get her onto the podcast as her experience covers both delivery and more recently coaching and advising senior teams on how to ensure successful transformation. As such, I think that you'll agree she brings a different perspective to the show.
Thanks for agreeing to be part of this podcast series. I was really keen to get you involved, especially because you've experience of both leading organisations through complex change, but then in more recent years been involved in coaching senior execs in the heart of transformation and creating high-performing teams. So I think I'm sure the discussion will bring out many different aspects that we've not covered in previous episodes. So I'm looking forward to this episode. But first, we always start with a little background, your backstory, shall we say. And so do you want to just tell me a little bit about your career and how you got into change and transformation in the first place?
Sure. So thanks for inviting me to do this, Tony. So my name's Anne Shiels, and I now run my own consulting business. So what I do now is I support senior leaders, typically business owners, C-suite level below, either on an individual basis or increasingly with teams, actually. And a lot of the work I do is helping people through change and transformation. So whether that's at an individual level, at an organisational level, or at a team level. So I've got a real passion for working with people through change, and I think that's been ignited from my executive career. Yeah. So if I kind of go back to that, and I've got over 30 years experience in the corporate world, so far too much to bore everyone going through every single bit of that. But what I'll maybe do is pull out some of the salient points that I think speak to the whole change agenda, if you like.
Please, yeah.
So I think probably the first one was my background is primarily as a chief human resources officer, and I've worked in a number of different industry sectors, so financial services, telecoms, retail, consumer goods. And I was in financial services right in the middle of the global financial crisis. So if ever you want an environment to learn about change and transformation and learn it blooming quickly when you've got the eyes of the world watching you, then that was certainly.
Totally agree.
So yeah, I had a senior HR role with Hbos at the time, right, and lived through that whole period, including the acquisition by Lloyds Banking Group. And I actually led the integration of the Lloyds and Hbos insurance division from a people perspective. So that was an incredibly interesting experience, two hugely different cultures. So, the classic thing on paper, they look very similar. So similar product set, similar skills, similar clients. Yeah. But the two organisations just could not have been more different culturally.
No, I understand that absolutely, and I think my background is financial services as well, and I was RBS,
right,
and that sort of cultural difference between the Scottish Royal Bank focus and then the English focus NatWest was similar. But I remember also working with some people that had been involved in the Lloyds TSB merger. And the feedback I've had from many people is that they never really got that right. So there was two completely different cultures. So I'm assuming when it came to Hbos, then there was almost three different types of. There was the Hbos, and then there was the Lloyds, and then there was the TSB group.
Yeah, and even going back further than that, Tony, there was when I joined Hbos, it was not long after the Halifax and the Bank of Scotland had come together. So it was Hbos when I joined, but still in early days.
Yeah.
And even several years on, people would still identify themselves as either being from the Bank of Scotland or from Halifax. And it just really, really struck me of how powerful that sense of identity is.
Yeah.
And if you try and ignore that or take that away from people, then people will never be able to move on and embrace what's new. So,
but I think also if you can embrace that, it can become really, really powerful.
It can, and what I've learned, I think subsequently, is there is a way to embrace it, and very often people get that wrong, or usually through very good intent, because what I've seen is, the people who are leading change have had the privilege and the advantage of probably months and months of planning for it. So, from their perspective, I often use the analogy of running a marathon. So from their perspective, they've been months and months in training, and we get to launch day or whatever it is, and they're ready to be off the starting blocks. They're excited, they're sprinting ahead, they can see what the end's like, they've been well prepared for it. And then everybody else hasn't even got the trainers laced up. and they've been told to be really excited about this new thing, whatever it is. And nobody's allowed them to almost grieve for what they have to let go of. And there's lots of research about the importance of endings. And I think very often organizations in their desire to try and motivate and excite people spend too much time in the early days talking about the shiny new horizon and not letting people acknowledge that they have to let go of something in order to go there. And I think that for me, that's one of the big lessons I've learned through change that I've led subsequently from the Hbos one. And one of the things I do a lot with teams now when I'm working with them is to encourage them just to acknowledge and let people acknowledge what it is they need to let go of, and respect and honour before they move on.
And it's also, I suppose, taking that on an individual basis as well, isn't it? Because some people will be ready. They'll be wanting to jump on the train and get to the next destination without a care in the world, where others that have maybe lived and breathed the organisation for many, many years will be very reticent. And it's understanding that and communicating in the right way to those individual groups.
Absolutely. And as human beings, we don't like change. We sometimes think we do, and we can get it intellectually and we can see all of the rational arguments, but the emotional response to it is something completely different. And you can't help people with the emotional response by presenting them with a rational argument. You have to engage where people are and acknowledge that and help them along the journey. So it's complex, and as you say, it's multidimensional. And what makes us all fascinating as human beings is we're all hugely different.
Totally agree. So that was Hbos. You were just telling us a little bit about your sort of career and how your change and transformation experience grew. So what happened after Hbos?
Yeah, so I joined Hallmark Cards after Hbos, and I led HR for the international businesses in Hallmark. And we had a huge transformation program to do on the back of a very challenging external marketplace. The whole category of greetings cards was under a lot of pressure. And the business model hadn't really been reviewed for some time. So we did a lot of work to reset the strategy, to review the business model. And this was a third generation family owned business. where length of service was valued, and and there's a lot to be said for that, but equally the downside of that is people were very, very set in their ways. So, but I really resonated with what you said about some people really being ready and willing and wanting to embrace the change, and others feeling very threatened by it. And we had a real mix of that. And then you also overlaid the different cultural aspects of the global the global aspect of it as well. So you had, different, and I don't like putting people in boxes because we don't belong in boxes, but there are some, national differences in how people were reacting as well. So
absolutely. It's interesting that you bring up the subject of family business, though, because I'm doing quite a bit of work in the consulting practice around sort of family-owned businesses and the complexities that overlay a family-owned business against any other type of business. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that the grandson had started to engage with them to take the family business on a digital transformation for all the right reasons. But the grandfather who set the business up was still involved, heavily involved, and almost had a right of veto. So this guy was in his late 80s, and the concept of digitalization was like, what are we talking about? And the grandson was had been pulling his hair out because he knows, and the sort of second generation people know it's what they need, but the founder and the sort of the overall sort of leader of the business just wasn't buying into it, and it's having a big impact upon the performance of that business.
Yeah, family businesses are fascinating because the complexity of the dynamics that, and some of which are seen, many of which are not seen, are really, really challenging, interesting, challenging, and in my experience, you have to be very, very sensitive in how you tackle them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about obviously Hbos in banking, and then moved into a Hallmark, completely different sector. And yes, we've spoken about the added complexity of the global aspect of that and the family side. But culturally, did you see much differences between those two sectors in the way that they were looking at change and the transformation agenda?
Hugely, and I've also worked in other sectors as well, and I've had the privilege of working, I guess, like you, Tony, in lots of different sectors, and what strikes me is there are lots of similarities, more similarities than you would expect, and the similarities are probably down to the human side of it and how humans react to change. The differences of the organisational context and the culture around them, and how that human reaction will be accepted or not, or how it lands within the broader culture. So I think what I saw in Hallmark was a real fear of change on the whole, and this real sort of dichotomy between understanding all of the commercial realities, but not being sure what that meant for individuals, and not being confident about what a new model, what a new strategy could look like. And I think one of the features I found a lot with family-owned businesses is they tend to be quite paternalistic. So almost a reticence to be really honest about what needed to happen and why it needed to happen meant that the people still didn't really get the compelling reason. So in a desire to try and protect people in many ways, while the intent is one thing, the impact can be quite the opposite.
No, yeah, totally understand.
Yeah. Whereas in the banking world, it was much, it was much more direct. It was much more cutthroat almost.
Yeah.
And it was almost one extreme to the other, actually. And as in many cases with life, the right answer tends to lie somewhere in the middle.
Agreed. And I have this conversation quite frequently about whether or not it's better for someone who's leading the change to be sector experienced, or actually someone that's like yourself, just moved from one sector to the other, having a real understanding of what it takes to take organisations through change. What's your perception on that? I know personally, I know what mine is, but what's yours around whether or not it's better for someone to have massive amount of industry knowledge, or someone who's completely new into the industry driving change?
I think my first reaction to that, Tony, would be it's never about one person. So it would be, who do you have around you, and do you have the right skills and experience and diversity of voices around the table? So if the leader is coming from the sector, I would think it's incredibly important that he or she surrounds themselves with people who can have a freshness of but to make sure that they're willing to listen to it. And it's okay surrounding yourself with the right people, but you've got to be prepared to listen to it. And I think the converse would be true. So if the leader is from outside the sector, make sure that they have people around them who have got some depth of experience, and it's that would be my
and it's having that.
It leads me on to another thought, but I'd be interested in your perception first.
No, I was just going to say it absolutely agree. It's important to have that diversity around that table. That's that team that's leading that change. And the point you were saying about people having to being prepared to listen.
Yeah.
But I think equally, it's having people around that table who are prepared to challenge. And because you need both, and that's all too often, especially with again in a family business, that can be quite challenging. A non-family member challenging a family member, if they feel that they're going down the wrong route.
Absolutely agree, and it also just prompted my thinking about one of the other things I've learned along the journey is, whether it's as a result of an acquisition, whether it's new teams you put together during change or post change, sometimes people and organizations have a tendency to think that if you get the right individuals and put them together in a team, then because you've got the right individuals, some kind of magic is going to happen all by itself. And these fantastic individuals are going to just gel and work together as a team. And it just doesn't happen, or very, very rarely. And I think a lot of the work I'm starting to do now is to help to accelerate the performance of the team by just putting in some intentional interventions to encourage the team not just to dive straight into the work, but to think about how they're going to work and how they're going to, to your point, get the right amount of challenge, support, the voices heard properly, working collaboratively and not off in silos, how they make decisions, how they deal with challenges, how they have disagreements. And all of that needs work and intention. And it's one of the things that it saddens me when I see teams saying they don't have time to do that, because actually you don't have time not to do it.
It's a false economy, isn't it? It's because it'll come back and bite you somewhere along the lines, and often many times. So it takes the program gets extended because you haven't had those really direct conversations, in some cases indirect conversations up front, to get everything on the table and have consistent and common understanding of how you're taking things forward. I sort of, I'm a big sporting fan, and I always use the analogy of a football team or a rugby team. If you have a team of 11 superstars, unlikely that team will win because their egos will get in the way. Because you need people. And I always find the cycling teams are the best to look at, because they have a team that will have one or two leaders who will, if they're going to win the Tour de France, there will be one or two in that team that will win it. There'll be a leader, and then there'll be a backup. Yeah. And then the rest of the team, they call themselves domestiques, and they are just there to feed and protect and deliver that leader of the team in the right place to win the to win the race. And I think there's lessons that business can use from that sort of approach.
I think that is a really great analogy, Tony. And just to build on that, the other thing that team would have is they would all be totally and completely aligned behind a common goal. And the vision, everyone would have exactly the same. Because that's the other thing that I find sometimes in change, that with a group of people, everyone has their own spin on what this means and why they're doing it. And sometimes not enough time is spent to get everyone properly on the same page and properly heard about what, what the destination is, what the goal is. So that, that's when conflict and confusion can arise in the organisation as well.
And I've found that's when politics within organisations start to come into play, where personal ambitions and personal agendas start to conflict with the overall organisation agenda and vision. And that's where the frustration comes in, I suppose. Certainly from my perspective, that's why I left corporate life many years ago. Just had enough of that politics.
Yeah, and it's just such look, politics are always going to exist when you have groups of people together. It's when it becomes destructive, and when you look at the amount of energy that's disproportionately spent. And very often it's because people don't have the right conversations in the right way.
That's right. And I think that's coming back to the sort of transformation space. That's critical that you have those conversations with the key stakeholders to really understand what their agenda is and how the change can either support, or if it doesn't support their personal agenda, what we're going to do about it. As you say, right up front, so that you've got everything on the table. And you'll never get everything on the table, so there'll always be surprises as you go along, but if you can get most of them out up front, at least you're in a better place.
If you can create a climate where that sort of dialogue is encouraged and respected, and you can create a space where it's okay, and where those conversations can happen, it can save a huge amount of time and money down the line.
Absolutely. So you moved out of taking responsibility for delivering transformation and change in an executive capacity into now, as we said earlier, coaching and supporting senior leaders to drive their change agenda. How have you had to adapt your style to make that transition?
I had to learn to be a coach and not a leader, and it's very, very different. So I, as most executive coaches do, went away and did a lot of personal development work, a lot of training to do that. And it's an interesting transition, because I think at first I was quite purist and went, after having done my coach training, and it's very easy to go into a purist space and say, I mustn't bring in my own perspective, etc., etc. And I had a real aha moment with a coach supervisor I was working with once, and he said to me, what are you doing, Anne? You've got 30 plus years of really valuable corporate experience. Why are you denying your clients the opportunity of hearing some of that? And it was just like permission to combine both that experience and the coaching skills. And I think I found a way of navigating that. Always in discussion with my client, what is it they really want? And we're always talking about, would you like me to offer some insight here, or would you like me to facilitate your thinking? And sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other. But I think having experience and confidence in the coaching world, I think you find the right balance.
Yeah.
But, at first I probably went too far in the other direction. And I'm also a non-executive director, so it's good that I can also bring some of my experience around the board table there as well.
Yes, yeah, and that's a different perspective again, isn't it? It's that challenge and probing aspect of that to ensure that the exec teams are delivering against their agreed agenda, and that's again slightly different than, as you say, a sort of traditional coaching approach, which will be more facilitative and as you say, helping them to come up with their own answers rather than challenging them against the answers that they're providing.
Yeah, and it's great. It's great wearing, well, I enjoy it anyway. It wouldn't be for everyone, but I enjoy wearing the different hats.
So of all the programs you've been involved in then, which have you found the most interesting? And that could be both as during the leading elements in parts of your career or the stuff that you're doing now.
I think probably the hallmark one, just because it's a really difficult question, that, because there's bits of all of them that I find really interesting. I think probably the hallmark one, because of the, if I can say, the relative inexperience of the organisation in embracing and leading transformational change.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a well-trodden path. They didn't have a lot of leaders who knew how to do this.
Yeah.
So, and then you add the, all of the other complexities that we talked about earlier. So when all of that converges, and, not a whole load of expensive consultants and resources like, the Hbos loads one would have had, that made it really, really interesting. And I'm still working, doing different things, but still working as a consultant now rather than within the organisation. So it's something that I've been able to see over quite an extended period, which is also really rewarding, actually, when you can see some of that change. But yeah, that was interesting and challenging.
Yeah. So within Hallmark then, what were some of the major successes that you experienced there, and just can you just talk us through how they came about? Some of the key lessons, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think some of the key lessons were, the piece that I spoke about earlier about recognising how to take people on the journey, and we really invested in internal communications, but not as a download, top-down message, which perhaps might have been the approach before. So we really thought about how do we engage people, and this was a creative company, so you had to do it in a really creative way. So we were talking about cost at one point, and we actually brought in trolley loads full of greetings cards, and we brought it to life for people in a very visual way, and we also we created we created a storyboard and let people draw pictures, and we thought about what type of people are we working with, where are they starting from, what's the best way that they're going to engage with this. So somebody standing up with with a bunch of numbers, and it just wasn't going to work. I mean, it may do if you're in a different kind of environment, you might dial that up a bit more, but we had to dial that down, and we had to find a way of engaging that worked with the profile of the workforce, and we had to let them get, we had to encourage them to be involved.
Yeah.
And there was something about the two-way dialogue as well.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful, though, isn't it? Because we've had lots of conversations in previous episodes about the need to engage with people.
Yeah.
But I would say a lot of organisations, when they look to engage, will have meetings, they'll have facilitated discussions, they'll have round tables, and it'll all be quite staid, traditional. But as you say, just bringing in different ways, looking at things in a different, with a different sort of lens or a different perspective, and getting them. But they probably didn't even at some stage think that was part of the change progress.
Exactly.
You were just taking them on and doing stuff that they would naturally be getting involved with anyway. And I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, there's something about ongoing two-way dialogue, and not the set piece stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really tough, especially when you've got a large organisation.
Because people see through that, don't they? They see if it's just like a static type of approach, they see through it. They know that actually you're just engaging, but you've probably already got the clear vision about how you're going to take this forward. So let's just cut to the chase and tell us what you're going to do to us, type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think transparency and authenticity are really, really important. And there were times when we stood up and said, we said we would engage every 2 weeks or whatever it was. Actually, we haven't got anything else to tell you. There's nothing changed since last week. But the worst thing you can do is cancel a meeting.
Yeah.
So you just say, we haven't got anything to tell you. So what would you like to ask us?
Yeah. Because if you cancel the meeting, then people start thinking, well, what's going on? Are we going down a different route now? They don't want to tell us, and all of that. You can't stop the conversation, can you?
No.
You can sort of leave the conversation, but you can't stop the conversation.
No.
Because people will have a conversation themselves, and it'll be off agenda.
There's a wonderful story, if I can indulge myself for a moment.
No, absolutely, yeah.
From my Hbos days, which I tell quite a lot because it really brings it to life for me. And it was at the time when a number of, cost was going out of the business, some sites were being closed down. So there was a real sense of fear and anticipation in many places. And one of the call centres had one of the most brilliant leaders leading it. He was really superb. His staff loved him. It was fantastic. He had gone down on a Sunday morning to the swimming pool with his toddler, and gone in, got changed, took his toddler swimming, went into work on Monday morning. And on Monday morning, there was 3 or 4 people outside his door and said, right, come on, level with us. We're going to close, aren't we? I went, what? Where did that come from? And they said, well, we saw you in the swimming pool on Sunday morning, and you couldn't even look us in the eye. You didn't say hello. And he said he'd been up all night with a new baby. He'd taken his toddler out swimming because his wife was trying to get a bit of rest. He was absolutely exhausted. He genuinely didn't see them. Yeah. But because he hadn't said hello, by Monday morning, this had got to the point of, because he didn't speak to us, they must be closing the site. And it just, that the unintended consequences of, and the whole sense of the shadow of the leader, and how people look for any tiny little thing. And, you know, as you say, communication is everything, because people will fill the gaps themselves. And that was just utterly crazy. But it's how people felt.
No, I agree. And it takes me back to I was on LinkedIn last night, and a colleague, ex-colleague, 25 years ago, we worked together, and he put this note up. He was doing a presentation today, and he was talking about, and it's been talking about people that have influenced him in the past. And he referred back to this guy that we both worked with probably 25, 30 years ago, and used a quote. And it was a guy called Mike Geacock. He's been on one of the episodes a few months ago. And he came up with a phrase that he uses often is, if I remember it correctly now, nobody cares about what you know until they know that you care. And that stayed with all of us that work with Mike. But again, going back to that story that you were just saying, that guy obviously cared about his team, and the fact that as a one-off, it appeared that he wasn't caring about them. It suddenly it came across as, well, something must be amiss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is interesting, that sort of, as you say, that the role of the leader in taking the team on that journey and engaging with the team and embracing that process is absolutely critical.
It's hugely important. And another phrase that I like to remember is, you know, the one, I may not remember what you said, but I'll always remember how you made me feel.
Yes. Great.
So, you know, again, people can stand up with a whole load of PowerPoint slides, and, you know, 9 times out of 10, people won't take it on board. They won't remember it, but the way in which you interact with them, they'll remember that.
Yeah, and it is that power of the story as well, isn't it? And you know, and as you say, there's the great speeches in history.
Yeah.
It's not what they said, and many times it's how they've said it, and it's the emotion that it's sort of engendered within you that you remember. It's not necessarily the words, but it's the emotion, isn't it, that you remember.
Yeah.
Blimey, that got a bit deep.
Yeah, there we go. Change is people.
It is, absolutely. So obviously we've been talking quite a lot about engagement and taking people on a journey. What other elements do you think are absolutely vital to have in place to drive successful change?
Yeah, I think having a clear plan, but acknowledging that plan will need to change, and sharing as much of that with people as possible, having some clear measures of success, and communicating what they are and celebrating them along the way is really important, because change is a big hairy monster, and, you know, you could arguably say you never get there. So what are the measures of success, and how do you celebrate them? How do you learn is the other thing as well, because things aren't always going to go right.
Yeah.
So when mistakes are made, which they will be made, acknowledge it, take the learning from it, and move on. Now, the same mistake keeps getting made over and over again. That's a different matter. But I think you have to let people experiment. You have to let people know it's okay that things, we're not going to get it right all the time.
Because if you run through something that you get it right 100% of the time, you've not really pushed the envelope, have you?
No.
You've taken the safe option every time. You really have to embrace mistakes. And as you say, if they keep happening, that's a different story. But let's embrace them, let's learn from them, and let's move on, because that's when you are really pushing the envelope.
Absolutely. And finding a way of celebrating when you have successes, and sharing that in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be big, does it? It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't have to be a massive celebration. Sometimes it's simply a case of tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, "That's a really good job there," or sending. I remember again going back into the bank days, but just getting a little postcard from the director of the division that I was working in, just saying, "Yeah, that you did really well there." It's like, wow, he's recognised me. He's seen me. I'm not just another sort of number in his operation type of stuff. That can be really, really powerful for people.
Yeah, it can. Really powerful, really powerful. And I think also just getting people aligned behind, what the interim goals and steps are, so that I think sharing as much information as you can.
Yeah.
Overshare rather than undershare. Obviously within whatever constraints you're operating under, because there'll always be commercial constraints that you have to be aware of, but sharing as much as you can is really important. And also the other thing is, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. There will be things about how the organisation's operating now that you want to honour and hold on to. Yeah. And I think being upfront about that and letting people know, it's not that we're trying to erase history. We're not trying to say that what went before was in any way bad. It's just usually the context's changed and the challenges are different. So I think being respectful and honouring what's gone before and acknowledging what you need to let go of and why, and what you choose to hold on to and why, and being overt about that is really important.
Totally. We always finish these episodes with what's your one takeaway? We've spoken quite a lot about engagement, but is that the one takeaway, or is there something else that you think the one thing that will really make a difference to people in delivering change and transformation within organisations? What would you say that one takeaway should be?
Authentic dialogue.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, at every level. So at the level of the people at the board, at running the change, having those discussions that might be challenging, they might be supportive, whatever, but having proper conversations and not being frightened to challenge, not being frightened to fail, dialogue at that level, and then dialogue from an engagement perspective throughout the organisation. So listening and dialogue, I just that would be my biggest takeaway, I think. Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. That was really, really good. I think, like I say, we've covered off a number of areas now at a much deeper level than we have in previous ones, which I expected, to be fair, from as we said right at the start. So thank you very, very much for your time. If anyone has any questions, are you happy to engage with them?
More than happy, and really enjoyed the conversation, Tony, so thank you.
All right, Bill. Cheers. Thanks, Lynn.
Well, Anne, thanks once again. The time has simply flown by. Really interesting discussion that I'm sure you'll all agree Anne brings a completely different perspective to the other people that we've had on the pod so far. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the podcast and leave us a comment and a rating. It helps to get the message out to more people, and the more people that understand how to deliver successful transformation, the better in my book. The Transformation Leaders Hub continues to prosper, and we are in the process of launching a new platform with even more ways for you to interact with your peers. Check it out by clicking on the link in the show notes. See you in a couple of weeks.